The ink on the final divorce papers is dry, officially terminating the marriage of Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. Yet the brutal war over their remaining empire is actively escalating into unprecedented territory. For 8 grueling years, a massive silent faction of the global public held on to a stubborn, deeply emotional fantasy. Millions of fans watched the endless legal filings with a lingering hope that the sheer weight of their shared history and the profound bond of their six children would eventually force these two Hollywood titans to swallow their monumental egos and find their way back to each other. We were culturally conditioned to believe that a love story of that magnitude could not simply end in a sterile courtroom. But that lingering fantasy has just been permanently shattered, and the catalyst is a reality check named Ines de Ramon. This brings us to a polarizing and heartbreaking psychological crossroads that is tearing comment sections apart today. When a new partner enters the frame, fundamentally shifting the timeline from preserving the past to building a completely new family, is the door to reconciliation permanently sealed? The definitive signing of those divorce papers was not just a legal formality. It was a profound psychological severance driven by a new woman who wants her own future and potentially her own children with Brad Pitt. This is the exact moment the audience must confront a painful truth. The era of Brangelina is unequivocally dead. There is no triumphant reunion for the sake of the children. There is only the cold, hard reality of moving on. But this raises an incredibly dark and fascinating question about the nature of their ongoing escalating conflict over Chateau Miraval and their shared assets. If the romantic and familial ties are permanently severed, why is the financial war becoming more vicious right now? Is this escalating battle over a multi-million-dollar vineyard simply a ruthless calculated business transaction? Or is it the ultimate manifestation of two massive egos, furiously clashing because the underlying hope of a family reunion has been definitively destroyed? When the emotional connection is legally executed, does the fight for money become the only remaining way to stay connected to or punish the person you once built a life with? The public is fiercely divided. One side is mourning the absolute death of the ultimate modern family, arguing that the introduction of a new partner and the rush to sign the papers destroyed any chance of healing the original family unit. The other side argues that holding on to the fantasy of a reunion was toxic and that Brad Pitt taking decisive action to legally end the marriage to start fresh is the only healthy path forward. Today, we are going to tear down the romantic illusions and analyze the harsh strategic reality of what happens when a new love forces the final nail into the coffin of a Hollywood dynasty while the financial ghosts of that empire continue to wage war. To truly understand the magnitude of this final signature and the subsequent explosion of the financial warfare, we must first deconstruct the psychological architecture of the audience that has followed this saga for nearly a decade. For years, the public maintained a profound, almost parasocial investment in the narrative of Brangelina. They were not merely a celebrity couple, they were a global brand, a symbol of philanthropic partnership, and the architects of a sprawling multicultural family. When the initial separation occurred in 2016, the cognitive dissonance for the public was staggering. The sheer scale of their shared history created a widespread, unspoken assumption that a definitive end was simply impossible. Millions of observers projecting their own desires for familial reconciliation on this Hollywood canvas operated under the illusion that the prolonged legal stalemate was actually a dormant period of healing. The prevailing theory was that the mutual love for their 6 children would eventually serve as the ultimate bridge, forcing two massive egos to compromise and reunite. We are culturally wired to crave the redemption arc, the moment where the fractured family unit is miraculously restored against all odds. That specific redemption arc has now been permanently, legally obliterated. The definitive signing of the divorce papers, fundamentally driven by the presence and influence of Ines de Ramon, forces the audience to confront a deeply uncomfortable reality. The illusion of a paused timeline has shattered. Brad Pitt is not waiting in the wings for a familial resurrection. He is actively constructing a secondary timeline that explicitly excludes his former life. This is the agonizing value proposition we must analyze today. The transition from a paused history to a definitively closed chapter. The introduction of a new partner who envisions a future and potentially her own children requires the absolute execution of the past. You cannot lay the foundation for a new dynasty while the scaffolding of the old one remains standing. Ines de Ramon represents the stark, pragmatic deadline. that the Los Angeles court system could never enforce. Her presence shifted the objective from winning a battle against an ex-wife to clearing the psychological and legal airspace required to breathe in a new relationship. However, this is where the narrative takes a dark and profoundly complex turn, providing the core analytical value for anyone studying the anatomy of high-net-worth conflict. If the romantic ties are dead and the legal parameters of the marriage have been officially dissolved with ink and faxes, logic dictates that the hostility should organically begin to de-escalate. The emotional cord has been cut, so the respective parties should simply divide the remaining assets and retreat to their separate corners. Yet, the exact opposite is happening. The war over Chateau Miraval, a sprawling French estate and highly lucrative winery now valued in the hundreds of millions of dollars, is not just continuing. It is escalating into unprecedented vicious territory. The legal filings are becoming more aggressive, the PR maneuvers more calculated, and the financial hemorrhage more severe. This paradox forces us to ask the ultimate question. If the love is gone and the marriage is over, what exactly are they still fighting for? The answer lies in the concept of proxy warfare. When the emotional and familial avenues of communication are permanently severed by a finalized divorce, the shared assets often become the only remaining language through which two former partners can speak to each other. Chateau Miraval has ceased to be merely a piece of luxury real estate or a profitable business venture. It has mutated into a massive physical manifestation of unresolved grievances, perceived betrayals, and insurmountable pride. It is a monument to their fractured empire, and neither side is willing to let the other claim absolute victory over its ruins. In high-stakes, ultra-wealthy divorces, we frequently witness this exact phenomenon. The initial separation is driven by emotional collapse, but the tail end of the divorce morphs into ruthless corporate warfare. For Brad Pitt, pushing to finalize the legal divorce was a necessary step for his personal survival and his future with Ines. It was a containment strategy, isolating the emotional damage. But his refusal to yield on the Chateau Miraval issue suggests a starkly different strategy when it comes to his legacy and his perceived rights as a creator and investor. The legal arguments currently dominating the courtroom are ostensibly about contract law, right of first refusal, and non-disclosure agreements. But beneath the dense legal jargon, this is a battle about control and consequence. It is a fight to determine who gets to write the final sentence of their shared history. For Angelina Jolie, the legal maneuvers surrounding the sale of her share of the winery and the ongoing disputes appear equally rooted in a desire for total emancipation. The strategic leaks and the relentless pushback against Pitt's claims suggest a strategy designed to dismantle any remaining power dynamics that existed during the marriage. When we analyze this from a neutral journalistic perspective, it becomes clear that the financial war is no longer about the money itself. Both individuals possess wealth that transcends generations. A few $1,000,000, or even tens of millions in legal fees, is a drop in the ocean of their respective net worths. They are not fighting for financial survival. They are fighting for vindication. They are utilizing their vast resources to weaponize the legal system against each other, ensuring that even though the marriage is dead, the impact they have on each other's daily lives remains profoundly disruptive. This is the tragic irony that the audience must absorb. The fans who desperately hoped for a reunion for the sake of the children are now forced to watch those very same children grow up in the shadow of a never-ending corporate blood feud. The absolute severing of the marriage contract did not bring peace. It simply shifted the battlefield. It proved that sometimes two egos can be so massive and the sense of injury so deep that letting go feels indistinguishable from being destroyed. The presence of a new partner may have accelerated the legal paperwork, but it could not extinguish the fundamental psychological fire that continues to burn through their shared assets. Furthermore, we must examine the optics of this ongoing escalation. Every new subpoena, every leaked court document, and every aggressive legal filing serves to further erode the pristine public image they once cultivated as a united front. The audience is receiving a masterclass in how unresolved emotional trauma disguises itself as complex litigation. When a person cannot explicitly say, "You hurt me," in a way that satisfies their need for justice, they hire an army of attorneys to say, "You breached paragraph 4 of our corporate agreement." Instead, the hundreds of millions of dollars tied up in the French vineyards are essentially collateral damage in a much deeper, entirely unquantifiable war of attrition. As we look at the current state of affairs, The strategic reality is chilling. Brad Pitt has successfully bifurcated his life. He has secured his legal single status. He has integrated a stabilizing, forward-looking partner into his personal sphere, and he has effectively closed the door on the Brangelina era. Yet by continuing to escalate the fight over Miraval, he remains tethered to the very past he just finalized on paper. It is a dual existence, seeking peace in his private life, while simultaneously funding a massive war machine in the public sphere. This dichotomy is what makes the current situation so compelling and so universally relatable. It forces the viewer to evaluate the lingering conflicts in their own lives. At what point does fighting for what you believe is fair actually cost you your freedom? Ultimately, the value of analyzing this specific moment in their 8-year saga lies in recognizing the death of the Hollywood fairy tale. The public is grieving the loss of an ideal, the notion that love can conquer all, even massive fundamental differences. The reality we are left with is stark, sterile, and entirely transactional. The dream of reconciliation has been replaced by the reality of litigation. The family unit is fractured, the assets are heavily contested, and the only remaining connection between two of the most famous people on the planet is a stack of hostile legal documents sitting in a Los Angeles courthouse. This is the profound takeaway for the audience today, the realization that the official end of a marriage rarely signifies the end of the conflict, and that sometimes the most brutal wars are fought long after the peace treaty has allegedly been signed.